been a table half the size of this room with almost 100 babies laying on there.
History of American Fighting Ships, USS Tennessee, BB-43. It's 22 pages. Anybody wants to read it, it's here. I'm not going to read it again. I was there part of the time. People say, well, who are you? Where'd you come from? How'd you get here? I was born up in Ashley, Pennsylvania, a small suburb of Wilkes-Barre. I was a year old when my parents moved out to the country, and so I grew up on a farm. And as you can see, that was me at age 11 working in the garden out back. And knickers and all. You remember knickers? Oh, yeah. And how they itched? It was nice, and I enjoyed it very much, and I was happy I was growing up there because during the Depression, people who lived on farms never went hungry. People who lived in the cities sometimes had a tough row to hoe to get their next meal. This is okay. You can see it now. All right. This is my backyard. This was the cattle down in the field that were down there, and this was my grandfather's house, was down over the side there, and over those mountains was Wilkes-Barre and Nanticoke. They were about 20 miles away or something like that. So that's where I came from. I went to an elementary school that had 2 rooms and the outhouses out back. I was 8 years old when we finally got electricity. And if you got electricity, then you could get plumbing. So we got inside plumbing when I was 9, and our outhouse disappeared. So when my grandchildren say, "What kind of television did you have, Grandpa?" And I say, "We didn't have television." A big night there in the summertime was to go out, crawl out my bedroom window on the, lay on the porch roof and look at the stars, and that's how I got interested in astronomy. From that point, I grew up, went to high school, graduated from high school, and in 1943, my graduating class in 43 was 43, it was a small school, and we all knew we were going into the service. I had listened to my parent, my father, tell me how bad it was in the trenches in France, and I said, I'm going to join the Navy because I want to take a shower and have food occasionally. So I joined the Navy, did boot camp at Sampson, and from Sampson went to Bainbridge, Maryland for radio school. And let me go back to Sampson. When I got up there, I was, the usual country bumpkin, and you had double bunks, and so it was Gallagher and Galow. Gallagher was a smart little Irish kid from Manhattan, and Galow was a country bumpkin from the farm. And Gallagher said, "Stick with me, kid, I'll take care of you." And he did. We went to radio school together. We went on a draft to the West Coast together. We went on a converted cruise ship to the Hawaiian Islands together, and we wound up on the USS Tennessee together. And many years later, we met each other again and had a great time. But that was the beginning, and that's how I got to there. This is the Tennessee. The keel was laid in 1914, but then the war came along. World War I came along. Then there was the Jutland Conference, which decided how much armament or how much the ship could weigh, how much the tonnage. And this was the first ship that had, you see this line along here? 14-inch armor plating on both sides of the ship. Also had a 14-inch main deck to protect it from other ships. And at those days, they weren't thinking about aircraft. They were thinking about horizontal bombardment from other guns. So the top of the turrets, like there and the two aft, was only 3/8 of an inch thick. And when we got hit at Pearl Harbor, of course I wasn't there then, went right through the top of the number 3 turret here. This is number 2, number 3 was in the back. Went right through there, and the only bomb that went through there was a converted phosphorus shell that they put fins on, and it didn't explode, but it just burned at a high temperature and burned a lot of people. This was a campaign to get native Tennesseans to crew the ship. A lot of native Tennesseans had very little education, and so many of those men who came on board there wound up not being able to write their names. They couldn't read, and so when they went for their paychecks, they had to sign their X, and then they had to have their division officer come up and sign his X and say, that's my X, and that's his X, and that's where, and so he gets paid. But this was a successful campaign. A large number of the people who were crews on the Tennessee came from the state of Tennessee, which was a nice idea at that time back in 1920. 1920.
I wonder if we could.
Okay. It might be done. All right, go ahead. So I met later on. I met a chief warrant officer. Okay, now we're better. Good. Thank you, John. The ship did its shakedown in 1921. It spent its time in the East Coast for a few years, went down to Guantanamo Bay and back a couple times, went through some bad storm, and eventually was assigned to the Pacific Fleet and sent out to San Pedro, California. That's where it spent the better part of its peacetime career. Peacetime career was strange during the Depression era, where they didn't have a lot of money to operate the ships, or for even gunnery practice. Gunnery practice had to be done very carefully and very quietly, and very that they could go out. So they had a lot of competitions between the crews of the battleships and the crews of the cruisers and destroyers. Everybody would enter into sports competitions, baseball, basketball, and like that. So this was the 1928 basketball team from the Tennessee. They were the fleet champs, and they also played against a lot of semi-pro people, teams in California, Oregon, and Washington, because that's where the ships were headquartered most times. This is the baseball team. The baseball team won the championship again in 1935. Hello there. So that in 1935, one of these players here, who was on the Tennessee baseball team, was drafted by the Detroit Tigers. Two of the other men on this team were brothers, the Manweiler brothers, and Leslie still lives down in Sun City, Arizona. And I hear from him occasionally. His brother died about 3 years ago. Uh, another team that they had was this was the whaleboat crew. These were all Marines, and they retired this cup here. This was the Battenberg Cup that was donated to the competition between the British and American fleets, and the Marine team here retired it that year. Next one. This is another team, another Marine team. They were the All-Navy champions. They had the cup. Then they had the Marine Challenge Cup was here. They had a Pacific Fleet Cup that was down here. They had the Battleship Selected Cup was another cup, and the Olympic Cup, and the Seattle Times Cup. Nobody could beat them. I have some other great pictures, but I didn't have time to get them in here. With them in their boat, it's an interesting thing. But this was what they did during peacetime. They had to keep people up, interested, and active in what they were doing, because they couldn't go out and do fleet operations as much as they needed to do. This gentleman here, maybe somebody around here might have heard about him. He was a chief rigger out at Johnsville. He was the fleet champion in 1929, was on the Tennessee. His name was...
It looked like it was clipping when I was trying to cut one back and the other one up.
I have a senior moment. I can't remember his name now. He died about 3 years ago. He lived up in Hatboro, too. Frankie Remus, that's his name.
No.
Next. This is the belt that he won that says Pacific Fleet Champion 1929. These were the kind of things that the crews of the ships did in order to keep themselves physically, mentally, and morally alert and awake, so that they could be ready if the war did come along. The ship won the Iron Man trophy, and once you won the Iron Man trophy, that says you were the best ship in the fleet, in the Pacific Fleet, and you had the best crew, the best gunners, the best sportsmen, the best riflemen, the best rowers. You were top dog, and everybody would shoot for that. And as a reward, they had dances. They had Iron Man dances. This one was in September the 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. on September the 15th, 1938. There's the Iron Man trophy, and this was the Iron Man mascot. We had, of course I wasn't there in 35, you know that, I'm not quite that old. But this was the other mascot, was Cinderella. Cinderella came on board in somebody's jacket, they told me, and the XO was going to kick the dog off, and so he gets down to get the dog, and the dog gave him one of those dog looks. And that was the end of that. Cinderella stayed on the ship. Had his own. Okay. Here we have Treasure Island. This is the finals for the bridge to Oakland, the Oakland Bay Bridge. This is the first stanchion for the Golden Gate Bridge, which would be over here, would be the other side of it. This is Alcatraz, and there's a fleet going out. It's probably one of their major fleet operations that they did. They did programs going out to sea there. Now we get into Pearl Harbor. This is D-Day, or yeah, Pearl Harbor Day, and there's an airplane there. It just dropped a bomb, and here's a bomb. A torpedo went off when it just missed. This is the Maryland and the Oklahoma, and that's the Tennessee and the West Virginia, and there was the Arizona and the Vestal, a repair ship. When things got worse than this, the Arizona blew up. All of their ammunition in the forward ammo exploded, and the whole bow was like blown off, and then all the oil came out and caught fire. And because it was right here and the Tennessee was right in front of it, the stern of the Tennessee caught fire, and they had to put that out, and then they had to fight the fire all the time. And the West Virginia, which was right next to us, was torpedoed. I think it took 6 torpedoes, and started to roll over to the port side. But the people on board there, much to their credit, they counter flooded the starboard side and made it go down straight, and so it was sunk in the mud straight and wedged the Tennessee up against the quay side. They took the torpedoes that were really meant for us, because the day before they were out firing, and the admiral who was on the Tennessee wanted to see how their accuracy was, so they transferred them to the West Virginia. They didn't take time to transfer them back. They came back in and tied up. Now, if you're an admiral and you want to go someplace, you don't want to go across another ship. So they were boarded. They tied him up outboard, and the West Virginia got the torpedoes that were really meant for us, because the admiral was on the West Virginia at the time. We had, and the other thing that happened that particular day, plus the ship was hit in the number 3 turret, went through the turret, but the forward guns, the number 2 on the number 2 turret took a direct hit, and splinters from that direct hit flew across and killed the captain on the West Virginia. He was on the bridge, and everybody saw that. They all told me the same story like clockwork, that they had seen that. Now, after a couple days after Pearl Harbor, here you see this is the West Virginia, and it's sunk. You see the mass of very even, but it's sunk right straight down, and this is the main deck, which should be up here where the Tennessee's main deck is. And the problem there was that as it sunk, it wedged the Tennessee over against the quay where it was tied up, and it couldn't move. That earlier in that day, the executive officer who was up on the bridge and a young ensign who was down in the engine room both decided to make knots for 12 knots, to make turns on the propellers for 12 knots. That kept the fire away from going down Battleship Row, but it melted everything on the back end of the Tennessee, which very serendipitously they saved the whole Battleship Row from being burned up. The people who were there told me about it, and they said that the paint melted off the bulkheads, and back in the aft areas where the officers lived, in the officer country, and paint was an inch thick, half-inch thick on the deck, because it melted right off the bulkhead and ran down. They had to clean that up. Plates had to be re-welded, rivets had to be replaced. So it was from December the 7th to the 20th when the ships were able to get underway and get out of there and come back to the States for permanent repairs. We then get down to when I got on board. This is down at Anahuac. This little guy here is, we called him Butterball Richard. He was a bosun's mate. And this guy here, Hamp Law, was a number 1 turret gunner. And they just finished painting the anchor chain. And we got down to Anahuac, and somebody in the command decided we were going to go inside the atoll. Now, an atoll is like a big semicircle, right, with little islands, and there's one passage in there, and somehow the captain got our ship inside so we could shoot at them from the back side where they weren't protected. From the outside, they were protected. So we get in there, and they were firing at us, and he was really ticked off because they were knocking off his paint job. They had just finished painting the anchor chain. Later on, when we got ready to leave there, we were going to the Marianas. This gentleman came on board. Nobody really knew who he was, and He was very nattily dressed all the time. And this bosun's mate says, I don't care who you are, get below and get a cap on. Turns out it was Secretary of the Navy Forrestal. And as the cartoon says, he says, I'll let Pinky tell you who the bosun's mate was, but he wasn't going to put it on the cartoon because I published a newspaper and I used these on paper. But Forrestal spent most of his time up in the flying bridge with a 30-06 shooting at sharks or porpoise or whatever you could see in the water. But he was a very, very quiet guy. Then we got into the Sargasso Straits. When we went into Lady, the beaches here was on Lady, and we had landed the troops there, and then MacArthur said, I have returned. The second time he said, I have returned. The first time he fell in the water and had to go back and change his uniform. And then they did it again for the pictures. But Admiral Ollendorf, who was the in charge of all the battleships, lined us up there and then had the cruisers and destroyers down along both sides. And as the Jap fleet came up, they could only bring their forward guns to bear on us. And you see, we had all these battleships who were doing broadsides. So that battle only lasted about 13 minutes until they were destroyed. I have to tell you that before this, we had gone down to Espiritu Santos for some repairs, and on the way down, we were run into because our steering motor jammed up, and the California bow and port side anchor got caught in our starboard bow, and it made a hole about 125 feet long and 6 or 7 feet high. So the California went into dry dock down at Espiritu Santos, and we had our repairs done by the Ajax, a repair ship. Came back up and then invaded Lady, and the subsequent battle with a battle fleet from the Japanese Navy, which turned out to be the last surface conflict between battleships. Now that there are no more battleships, there'll probably never be another situation like this where we stood off at 20,000 yards and sunk the whole bunch of them. Thank goodness we had better grade of radar than they had. So we had the firing situation well before they got into the position where they could see us. Tennessee also was up at Alaska. This is just a painting that was done up there, and I thought I would show how it looked in operation in a color painting. This man made these paintings, and then he wanted to sell them for an arm and a leg. We bought one, and I took a picture of it just to show it to you. At Lady, this is our anti-torpedo blister that got ripped open. Excuse me. An Army ship, the Warhawk, came out of the smoke and haze and fog and hit us in the port quarter. And actually what they hit was, if you look down here, you see these little white spots there? That was our beer locker. And so everybody was volunteering to go down and clean out the beer locker because the ship had run into it and they wanted to get that stuff out of there. There were a lot of happy deckhands that night who were really in good shape, even on 3.2 beer. And you know how bad that was. So now we had, the bow was sprung over, it had a hole in it, got a hole in the port side aft and a starboard side forward, and our guns had to be replaced. The rifling inside had to be replaced, and some of the 5-inch guns had to be replaced. So we were allowed to go back to Pearl. So we left. Another guy and I sent back all the dimensions on a damage report to the states, and told them what we needed to have replaced and what we needed to do. I remember Slats Warren, who was he was about that much taller than me, and had a very good wrist for you had a bug, a key. You had a sounder key that went this way, but if you were a good guy, you could have a bug and it would make automatic dots and dashes. So we sent that message back to the States. It was 800 groups, hoping that when we got back, we would find out we did it pretty good. We got back to Pearl, and that's the only picture I have of Admiral Nimitz. I met him. We were in inspection. They came on board. They're going to have an admiral's inspection. Everybody was really uptight about this. We went around and dug out our best shoes and uniforms, and people who had to get their hair cut. If you knew how to cut hair on board a battleship when there was going to be inspection, you could make a fortune, because everybody was sitting on ash cans and getting their hair cut because the admiral was going to inspect. So he came on board. He inspected the ship. He made some laudatory statements. He then went up and down and inspected all the troops. So I was in the radio division, and the radio people were shorthanded, and so you were either on watch, in the sack, or eating, one of three, because you were rotating on a 3-watch basis. We didn't have port and starboard watches like everybody else did. Admiral Nimitz is coming down the line, and he gets down to Eddie Lyons at the end, who was a little short guy, and he says, "Sailor, step forward." I'm like, oh God, Eddie's in trouble. He gets a little bit further up the line, and he says, "Sailor, step forward." I looked at him and I said, what did I do? No, everything is the way it should be. We secured from the Admiral's inspection. Our communications officer, Commander DePiro, came down and said, "Admiral Nimitz wants you guys to go down to sick bay because you don't look well." Everybody else was suntan, but the radio people were kind of white. We went down to sick bay. Commander Story, who was the senior medical man, looked at us, checked us out, says, "There's each a big bottle of liver and iron tablets." And let me tell you, they act just like a cork. And a few days later, Eddie said, "What are you doing with the liver and iron tablets?" I said, "I don't know, but I'm not going to take them anymore." We went topside that night and threw them over the side. That was the end of the liver and iron tablets, but it was an experience that I'll never forget to have. By the way, Nimitz had the bluest eyes you ever wanted to see. And he would look right at you. Whoa. What a man. After we got back to the States, they said we'd have 60 days. You would have a port and starboard leave, 30 days, and you could go home. So I got second one. I got starboard leave. That means I was in Seattle for Christmas, but I got home for New Year's Eve. And my buddy and I came home on a what was it, the Northwest Express or something like that, in a coach. So there was no sleeping. You just slept in a coach sitting straight up, and if you got something to eat, you were all right. And that was 5 days across the country. I finally got home. I got to Wilkes-Barre, and then I couldn't get home. We didn't have a telephone at our house, so I couldn't call anybody. So I got a train and a bus, and I finally got home, and my mother said, "Oh, well, how did you get here?" It was kind of interesting for her. I'm home about 20 days, get a telegram, report back to the ship immediately. So I get back to the ship, here it is, that's a beautiful looking ship there now, and you see it has these blisters on the outside, on both sides, so it made it so much wider. And we're going out the straits, Juan de Fuca, and they said, okay, we're going to do a speed run, and we got up to 21 knots, and that was everybody pushing. That was the best we could do. Everything was shaking. From there, we went back out to Pearl. We got into Pearl in the evening. We're taking on supplies. Oh, I didn't tell the people listening to me in this afternoon. We knew we were going to be there one night. They were taking supplies on, they're taking oil on, they're taking ammunition. And I thought, we can't even get off the ship. So two of us came up here, and we got up to the front, and they were tied up here, and we got off the ship with the Marine Guard. He left us off. And they were carrying on provisions. And we saw these boxes that said peaches. And they were, the big 1 gallon cans. There was 4 of them in a box. So I put one on my shoulder, and Dick put one on his shoulder, and we got in line behind the guys. Were walking out. They went that way, and we went this way. And the Marine said, "I want some of those peaches." Well, some of the other guys were coming behind, and they gave him a box of peaches. So he had peaches for a long time. But the Marine came down and said, "Who the heck's the wise guy that gave me a box of pumpkin? It just had a P on it. We thought it was peaches." But we had peaches and peach diarrhea and everything else. That was a great ship. Now we went to Ulithi, and we took on some armor-piercing ammo and some other stuff that you didn't get in Pearl, and went up to the invasion of Iwo Jima. And this area here, this side of Mount Suribachi and this part of the beach, was assigned to the Tennessee. Then the next sign up was for Nevada and the Idaho, and the Texas on the other side, and the Arkansas was over here. The cruisers had the other end. We figured that if we could cut them off and cut them in half, we could really shorten it. And we told them it was going to be 10, 12 days. D-Day at Iwo Jima was February the 19th, and we didn't leave there until the end of March. It was not an easy operation. The Marines at the beach there, and they were in volcanic ash up to their knees and couldn't move. It was not a nice place. This is the Tennessee doing its firing assignment on Mount Suribachi. You would find a gun emplacement and shell it, and 10 minutes later the gun emplacement would be 300 yards off to the right or off to the left or up or down, because they were on railroad tracks inside that mountain. And you could never really say, "Oh, there they are," because by the time you fired, they were on their way to another hole in the mountain. It took a long time to complete that operation. And Mount Suribachi is where the flag went up. I didn't see it going up, but I saw it afterward, and it was pretty inspirational. And anybody who tells me that it's okay to burn the flag or any of those things that they're talking about, these bleeding heart liberals, it's not okay, because that just gave everybody the inspiration. The Marines up on the beachhead could see it, and they said, "Well, we're not going to give up here." This is the landing day at Iwo. There's our ship there, and people were surprised when I showed them this picture that we were that close to the beachhead. We always went into about 1,000 yards, and for some reason or other, people who weren't involved in island landings thought that we would stand off, 2 miles or something, and lob shells in from there, but that wasn't the case. We fired 40 millimeter, or 20 millimeter, 5-inch 38s, and 14 inches from right there into the beachhead. And these are all the landing craft going in with the first wave. There's nobody hitting the beach yet. When they hit the beach, they were in deep doo-doo, because the beach was, like I said, nothing but volcanic ash, and you would go right in and up to your knees. Nothing could move. They got slaughtered pretty badly there. These are some of the casualties that they brought back from the initial landing. And one of my shipmates, who was topside, was touched very much by this operation. And this is what he sent me. His name was Ed Curley. It was a Seaman Second from Tennessee. He said on February the 17th, 45, during the battle for the island of Iwo Jima, my ship, the Tennessee, was fired on by an enemy shore battery, and a comrade was wounded by shrapnel, severing his jugular vein. I found him where he had been placed on the deck and stayed with him until he died. As I kneeled by him trying to comfort him, I realized he was in shock and probably did not comprehend my concern for him. At that point, my thoughts turned to his mother, and the agony she would suffer if she knew that at this moment her son was dying here on the deck. It was then that I tried to say a prayer, and I prayed for him and his mother, and my thoughts turned to my own mother and her distress were it I who lay here dying. So I said in the end the prayer for him and for me in case I had no time to say it later. This is what he prayed. O peace so quiet, surround this body stilled, whose spirit is now in flight to God's own open door. Lord, take him to your bosom and warm and put him in your highest mansion, no less for him that you have promised me. Forgive his sins and lay your hand upon his mother's heart, that all her grief will not be more than she can bear. And as we commit his body to the deep, I pray these things for me, should all of the battles rage be so willed that I join him. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Ed says, this was my first experience with shipboard fatality. I wrote the words down soon after and carried them with me until I received my discharge papers. That was many years ago, and I think the words are still true today. So do I. It was quite an experience at Iwo Jima. And whenever I see this picture, I think of Ed, and I think of his buddy who died there on the deck. And we buried a lot of people over the side. From Iwo Jima, we went back down to Ulithi, reprovisioned because we fired a lot of our ammo, and finally got back up to Okinawa. This was D-Day at Okinawa, April the 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday. And we went into general quarters, slammed the beachheads for 4 or 5 hours, and then around noon, they secured from general quarters. They went to a lighter than lockdown and passed out box lunches. And it was when I opened the box lunch and looked in it and saw 2 colored hard-boiled Easter eggs, I knew it was Easter Sunday. Before that, you really weren't aware of the time of the day or where you were. It was like, tomorrow we're going to do this, and tomorrow we're going to... nobody said it was April the 1st or April Fool's Day or Easter Sunday. It was, you opened the box and there was 2 colored eggs. At that time, my general quarters responsibility was communicating with the spotters on the beach or the spotters in the air, who would tell us where the enemy concentrations were. We had layout maps, but you saw the map from Iwo Jima. I had a big map in front of me on my desk, and I wore a pair of earphones and had a push-to-talk microphone to talk to these people who were over there telling us where to fire. They would tell me, give me a quadrant, a coordinate, and they'd tell me to fire. Well, I would fire 1 shot in there, and the computers that ran the guns were such that when you fired the shot, it would compute the trajectory, the arc distance, and when the shot was going to explode. So when I would pull the trigger, I would hear it, and when it would buzz, I would tell the spotters, splash, and they would see where that splash was, and they would say, you know, that's good, or up 2 and left 3, or whatever they needed. And we'd fire another one in that direction, and then they would say, oh, that's it, you know, lay 10 rounds in there, and as fast as they could set up the computers to set that up, as fast as I could pull the triggers, I would lay 10 rounds in, and then they would say, "Oh, that's good. Let's go on to the next one." So that's what my job was. Kind of exciting that I had control of 8 port and 8 starboard 5-inch 38 guns, and I was just a lousy second class or a third class radio operator. This is 60 years ago last week, April 12th, 1945, the day Franklin D. Roosevelt died. That was the day we got hit with our kamikaze. We'd splashed one there, another one was splashed back there. There was 5 of them were coming in on our port, 6 of them coming in on our port side. We shot down 5, and the 6th one got away into the haze and smoke because it was all hazy and smoky. And it came down and cleared off the starboard side. The wingtips clipped the bridge lanyards, and all the starboard side radar caps were ripped off. And this was the Zellers that was next to us. It was one of the picket destroyers. And here you can see the fire hoses are out. They got up there and immediately started putting the fire out on the back starboard side of the Tennessee. This is damage. Those are 5-inch 38s, and that's their turret that they were in. Back here's another pair of 5-inch 38s, and back was 2 more sets of them. This gun bucket here was 20 millimeters, and down here was a pointer. And if you go to the next one, this was a 40 millimeter quad 40s. They were pom-pom guns. This was a pointer for the 40s, and people in here were all Marines. Harry Meal was burned over about 80-some% of his body. They thought he wasn't going to make it. He comes to the reunions every year. He isn't pretty looking, but his face has been put back together, and his skin is put back together, and he was a very successful farmer. 80-some% of his body, they thought he wasn't going to make it. He comes to the reunions every year. He isn't pretty looking, but his face has been put back together, and his skin is put back together, and he was a very successful farmer. I always get a kick out of talking to Harry because he just tells you all kinds of stories. This is another view of the damage. See, there's the 40s, and there's the twin 5-inch 38s, and all of this here, this was a radar gun control. There was radar gun controls up in here that were all knocked out. And then there was a bomb landed back in there, 250-pound bomb, went through the deck, and the deck below was the armor plating deck, and it didn't go through there, but it killed a bunch of people down below. And that night we had the sad duty of burying, I think it was 118 over the side. And if you've never witnessed a burial at sea, you really don't want to. It's reported that during the funeral for the comrades who were killed there that night, and they had said during the day that Roosevelt had died, the report is that some wise deck ape said, "Who the hell is Harry Truman?" Because he was going to be our next president, and we had to carry along with him. It was really a shock to lose a man who stayed with us that long through the war, and now we've got this other guy who nobody knows anything about. He's going to be our next president. An interesting day. It's 60 years ago last week, and I can remember a lot of it like yesterday. we're leaving Okinawa to go out on patrol. We had some Marines come on board. We got another kamikaze attack. The Marines wanted to know, how are you going to dig a foxhole in that main deck? Well, you couldn't dig in that because that was in solid teak, and under that was another 3/4 of an inch of steel. But our cartoonist, Hamp Law, is still doing cartoons, and now he's doing cartoons for the Jersey battleship, and he's called Jersey Man. Here he worked for many years for Chilton Publication doing cartoons for an organization called Caputi. That was his whole deal. Very religious man, very wonderful guy, who just won't go anywhere outside of West Monroe, by God, Louisiana. That's where he stays. Oh yes, during the Marianas campaign, we had a Lieutenant Commander Draper on board who painted these paintings. This was a clean sweep down fore and aft. Anybody who was on the ship knew what that was. And this was our OS2U here. This is turret number 4 and turret number 3 back aft. Lieutenant Draper painted a number of paintings during World War II in the Marianas, and his paintings wound up in the National Geographic magazine, 1946. And I saw it, and I thought, wow, I wonder where I could find these. So I called the National Geographic. They said, well, we don't have them, but you'll find them in the Combat Arts Center at the Washington Navy Yard. So I called the Combat Arts Center and I asked them, and they said, yeah, I can send you some copies. So they sent me transparencies and also some negative copies so I could have them made up for the group guys on the ship. And then I discovered that Lieutenant Draper was a portrait painter in Manhattan. I called there, and lo and behold, he answered the phone himself. And I spoke to him, told him who I was and what I wanted to know and all this. And he told me in no uncertain terms that the Navy gave the National Geographics the right to use his pictures. And he says, I never got a damn cent. That's what happened to him. I found out later on by looking into Who's Who in America that he was the painter of kings and queens and presidents. He did 2 murals in Bancroft Hall down at the Academy, and was a very, very influential man in his community. After Okinawa, we had then gone up into the Yellow Sea, and we patrolled off the coast of China, and we were interdicting shipping from China to Japan, and so as a result of that, we also earned the China Service Medal. I got that after I was back home. It came in the mail one day. But then we took the invasion troops to a place called Wakayama-wan, which was south of Tokyo Bay, and was the headquarters for the Osaka Naval District. And these were the people who came out from Wakayama-wan to surrender to Admiral Oldendorf. This is the surrender party. This gentleman here was commander. It was a Commodore, Commodore Dawes, and he greeted him on behalf of Oldendorf. You had to be in a position where you could put them down. So Commodore Dawes did that, and then they were introduced to Admiral Jesse B. Oldendorf, great man, wonderful leader, Commodore Dawes, and these were the people who were surrendering to for the Osaka Naval District. After that surrender, we went up to Tokyo. We had Liberty in Tokyo. We enjoyed that. Got to see what it was like, what was left of it. I was impressed with the fact that the moat around the Imperial Palace a big moat, and the railroad yards went down alongside of, and there wasn't a stone missing in the walls around the Imperial Palace. The pinpoint bombing by the aircraft, what was it, the 15th Air Force out there, was incredible. And then they told us, well, we're going back to the States. So, wow. Then they said, you can't go through the Panama Canal because we had these anti-torpedo blisters put on the side. We were too wide to go through the Panama Canal. And everybody said, oh, not down through the Straits of Magellan. And then they posted our trip. We went from Tokyo, Yokohama, Singapore, Colombo, Ceylon, Cape Town, South Africa, to Philadelphia. And they said Philadelphia. I thought, wow, I'm going back home. The guys from the West Coast weren't too happy about that. But I remember one guy who lived in Missouri. Sterling Woodrum said, I don't want to go to the East Coast. Get there. I want that. Were you ever at the East Coast? He said, no. I said, well, shut up. We're going to the East Coast. And that's how we got to took care of that problem with him. We then, we had a happy hour in Japan in October the 1st. It was a day before my birthday. I was 20 years old. We would have these happy hours on board the ship, and different members of the crew who could sing, dance, or tell jokes, or do whatever they did would come out, and we'd have an ensign or lieutenant who would be the MC and do the whole thing. And it was a lot of fun. Happy hour. This was our route home. As you can see, we started in Tokyo, we went down to Singapore, then we went up to Colombo, and down to Cape Town, and then we were scheduled to stop at Rio, but they were having national elections there, so we had to make the haul from Cape Town to Philadelphia. Long piece of water over that section of the South Atlantic to the North Atlantic. We got off of Lewis, Delaware on the, I guess it was the 4th of December, and there was so much fog that the river pilots wouldn't come down to bring us up the river. And we sat there for 2 days, and Captain Cope, who was a native Philadelphian, said, we got the best damn radar, we got the best navigators, we're going up. And it wasn't until we got to the point where you could see Governor Prince Boulevard outside of Wilmington that you could see the shore. We went up in the fog. I was thinking, boy, this guy is really gutsy. So we got into Philadelphia in the morning of December the 7th, 1945, exactly 4 years from the beginning to the end. And the mayor of Philadelphia wanted us to parade up Broad Street, and Captain Cope said, no way, these guys don't even know where their dress blues are, let alone how to march anymore. So we didn't march. May the 20th was another happy hour. I don't know how this got in here. That should have been in earlier, but we'll just skip that. You know what those are about. Here is 3 sailors who were out to celebrate VEVJ Day. VE Day, we were in Buckner Bay, and you couldn't celebrate there because the war was still going on. And so when we get back to the States, we're going to celebrate. So we get back here, and you can't see here, but these pockets have fiery red bandanas, because we left the ship and we went into Wanamaker's to get a white handkerchief, and they said, well, it was $5 for a linen handkerchief. And Gravy, this guy here, Leon Gravy, said, I'm paying no $5. We went across the street into the 5 and 10, and we got big red bandanas and went back to see the clerk in Wanamaker's to let her know we didn't need them. But this was December the 11th, 1945. Leon Graves, Dick Dysart, and yours truly, and we're all a little sloshed there. We had a good time. It was a great night. Started out at the Calais Musical Bar on Sampson Street, and I don't know where we ended up. And that's the end. This is Joe Duffin, who now lives in Vernon, Connecticut. He was in the first division. He was a gunner's mate. And this is his girlfriend, who lived up in Easton, came down to see the ship come in and tie up. And that's the end of my presentation. Okay, you can knock that off.
All the way down.
Questions?
The rest of the way.
Sir?
I got one for you. You said you showed a picture where the beer locker got hit. I thought alcohol was prohibited on U.S. ships.
Oh no, we always carried 3.2 beer. You'd have to drink a lot of it, but if you were out to sea for a year, like we were,
Yeah.
2 cans of 3.2 beer was, you went for a loop. Oh yeah. Now, when the interesting thing, we left in January, and it was sometime in November we got to Colombo, Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, and we tied up at Colombo, and all of a sudden these British people were showing up, and they had been at a British air base called Trincomalee. And if you look on a map of Colombo, Sri Lanka, you see Trincomalee is up on the right-hand side, and they had an air base there. They came over in 6-bys and jeeps and everything else to pick us up and take us over because we spoke English. You know, they hadn't been talking to anybody who was English. They're talking to these Hindu people, and they had Rupert beer. Do you remember Rupert beer from New York? Wow. 2 bottles of that, and I was ready to go to bed. It was the real McCoy. It was what, 12% alcohol or something like that? But that was my my experience with the island of Ceylon and Trincomalee, and we almost got into a big fight because we were going across the island in this jeep, and this one British guy got out because there was a cow there, and he gave the cow a boot, and we all said, you know, you're going to get us killed because you don't touch the cows, the sacred cows. You didn't do anything to the sacred monkeys. They could come in and clean off your rice field, but they were sacred monkeys. It was terrible.
Can you share a little bit about that day when the 6 kamikazes were coming down on you? You went through a ship to defend yourself?
Off Okinawa, there was, the Japanese were putting back on their big push to stop us. So kamikazes were coming in, 150, 250 planes at a time. And they had, they posted destroyers out around the perimeter to be the first to interdict them. And when they would, the TBS, it was talk between ship, it was voice ship. You could talk back and forth. It was very high frequency. It was only good from horizon to horizon. But you could hear the TBS say, they're getting through. We're okay. We're pretty big. We'll take care of them. And I got to say that our gunners were excellent, and the fact that the Americans had a proximity fuse. So the Navy had proximity fuses on the 5-inch 38 guns, so that when the shell got within a proximity distance of a target, it would explode and take the target out. You didn't have to hit them directly. If they were coming in on you and they got beyond the point where a 5-inch 38 could zero in on them, and now you're shooting 40 millimeter and 20 millimeter, you couldn't stop them because that plane had much more bulk. You had to blow it up to stop it. If you hit them with 40 millimeters, you could take off part of their wings or something like that. But the impetus of the flight was too much to overcome with smaller guns. The big guns would blow them up, blow them right out of the water, blow them out of the air, I should say. Well, all the ships were when a kamikaze group was coming in, everybody was talking to everybody else. It got to be kind of a cacophony of sound, and you would let the guys who were out on the perimeter do all the direction of what was going on. Yeah. Towards the end there at Okinawa, the Japs decided that they would send their last battleship to had enough oil to get to Okinawa, and it was a suicide crew on this battleship that was supposed to come to Okinawa and then blow up the invading forces with they had 18-inch guns. The Air Force, the Navy air guys, sunk that ship before it ever got near us. So you see how much importance the air arm of the Navy, and now we know that you can sink anything with an air attack. So I don't recall any feeling of whoa during that attack. But when they hit us, it was like, holy shit, he took off half the starboard side of the ship. And there was all these guys who were killed.
On your designation of 5-inch 38, what does the 38 signify?
I was a radio operator. I just pulled the triggers. I don't know, 5-inch 38. Anybody know what 5-inch 38 caliber?
The barrel's 38 times as long as the width of the ship.
Oh, there you go. Good. And 14-inch 50s, that's the same thing, right? Okay, because that's what the main batteries were. Yes.
Did you have aircraft carriers with you at some time?
No. The first time we saw any aircraft carriers of any consequence was at Leyte when we were in Leyte and we were fighting the Saratoga Strait area, and the Taffy 2, which was a bunch of Jeep aircraft carriers that they were freighters, and they put a flight deck on them and said, now it's a carrier, which I thought was pretty bad. But that was the only time we really ever saw it. Halsey and the fast attack battleships and the carriers, they were always out roaming around someplace else. In fact, at Leyte, at one time, Nimitz sent a message to Halsey saying, the world wants to know where Halsey is. He was way up north. He had been deflected by a dummy fleet of ships that were coming out of Japan, and he went up there and there was nothing there. So it was an embarrassment for him not to be down there where we were getting the you-know-what kicked out of us. Anything else? Oh yes, that was the exciting day. We were at Buckner Bay, and this typhoon came up in 45. It was basically one of the worst storms that ever hit that area. And so all the ships had to go out and ride it out. The Pittsburgh had its bow ripped off in that typhoon. And I remember being topside and seeing, our ship had a clipper bow, so when it came down like that, the screws would come out of the water, then the bow would come up and would come down, and it would throw spray out like 300 yards on either side. And any place you went that day, it was one hand for you and one hand for the ship, because you couldn't walk around straight up. Lockers were ripped off of bulkheads. Dinner serving food trays were all over the place. It was the worst storm I'd ever been in. And a couple of years ago, we went down to Bermuda, and we're coming back, and my wife wakes me up at 4 o'clock. She said, what are you doing? You're sleeping. I said, that's what I do best at 4 o'clock in the morning, is sleep. She says, we're going to sink. We're in a little storm coming from Bermuda back here. The waves might have been 25 feet or something, and she was having a fit. She put on all her jewelry. I'm not going to look. I'm going to go with her. I told her, I said, lay down, and your stomach will quiet down, and you'll be all right. And that's the truth. Don't stand up on a ship in a storm, because you will get seasick. Any other questions?
What have you done since leaving?
Pardon?
What have you done since leaving the Navy?
Oh, since I left the Navy, I got out of the Navy and went home, like everybody did. And I got a job driving a lumber truck, hauling lumber. And after about 6 months, I decided, oh, God, this is work. And I thought, what can I do? So I thought I'd come down to Philadelphia, go to Drexel, and try to get a license to be an air traffic controller, because I was used to talking to forward observers back and forth and controlling what they were doing. And trying to get into Drexel at that time, if you didn't know somebody or weren't within 25 of the top of the list, you weren't going to get in. And I met this young man who was Irvin Aptaker. He was from out in West Philly, and he said, I know a place down on Pine Street that teaches radio engineering. We can go down there. So I didn't know where it was. So we went down to Pine Street, and there was the Philadelphia Wireless Institute. And went to school there, got my broadcast license. Now I've got my license, but you can't get a job unless somebody endorses the back of your license. So now I've got the license, but I don't get the endorsement, and I can't get the endorsements unless I have a job, and it's catch-22. And, so I went back home. I went down to WBRE in Wilkes-Barre, and I asked them if they would hire me, and the chief engineer says, well, I can't hire you, but I'll put you to work here. And if you prove to me you can do everything you're supposed to be able to do, run the transmitter, do remotes, do this, do engineering, do the studio, I'll see what I can do. So I worked there for 6 months for free. And during that 6 months, he found a job for me. And he called me into his office one day. He says, I got a job for you in Dover, Delaware, 1,000-watt station, daytime station. You go down there, take your license, I'll sign it. And he signed it. I went down and went to work in Dover, Delaware for a fast $32.50 a week. And after I went to a couple of other stations, and finally I was at a station in Easton, and a friend of mine called me up and said he'd been to his dentist. And this is how things happen. I went to my dentist, and the dentist had taken care of an engineer from KYW, told him that they were looking for an engineer, and the dentist told my friend called me. I took off for Philadelphia from Easton. I was driving a 1948 DeSoto, fluid drive. I made it down there in record time, got interviewed, was hired, went back to Easton, told him I was quitting in 2 weeks, went back down to Philadelphia in 2 weeks, and in the interim, between the time I was hired and the time I started to work, the union contract had gone into it, and instead of starting at $50 a week, I was getting $65 a week. I had it made. $65 a week. Oh my God. I spent 40 years there. I retired in 1990. And I thank you for your attention.
Before we close, I'd just like to, you've all got a copy of the newsletter. If you don't, you should pick one up back there. And I'm quite proud of the programs that I've put together for the rest of the year. I'm still working on something for August and something for December. But I have 3 authors lined up, and I think they have great programs. In particular, there's one coming up in June 21st. I put the title of his book, which I'm now reading, You're Stepping on My Cloak and Dagger. He was in the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, and a little description of it. He's going to be, a week from tomorrow night, he will be speaking at the Bucks County Library, so that's right down below our future programs. if you're not going to be here in June, or if you can't wait until June to hear him, head up to Doylestown and hear it up there. In July, I think we have an excellent speaker. I've talked to him several times on the phone. He does a lot of talks at universities and different places. He was an officer in the German Africa Corps. He was surrendered in 1943 and went through a total of 16 different camps before he ended up in his 16th camp, which was at Crossfield, Tennessee. And his book, Behind Barbed Wire, excellent book I've got. He self-published it, $18, and he'll be here. It's part of a bigger story, his memoirs, which I'm not sure, down at the bottom of the page, introducing Gerhard Haynes. After the war, he joined the Church World Service, an American Protestant organization engaged in international relief, refugee, and development work. He's lived and traveled in 80 different countries. So, and he's an excellent speaker, and I think we'll enjoy it. October 21 or October 18th, we're going to have Major General Wesley Craig, who is in charge of the Pennsylvania National Guard, the 28th Division. And incidentally, Brandon Traster is now with the 2nd Brigade of the 28th Division in training for going to Iraq. So we've got a lot of, and author Susan Vogt, Brandon got me in touch with her. She has at the moment a 3-book series, the Pennsylvania something series. Where is it? Heartlands, yes, Pennsylvania Heartland series, and Volume 3 is the World War II years. She's going to be talking about what the farmers were doing for the effort, what industry was doing, and what was Pennsylvanians doing in the service. So I think we got a great lineup here. Not to discredit any of the ones we've had up to now, because we've had good ones up to now too, including tonight. What else do we need to talk about? Just read it, and one item I added in here that I've talked for several months about with a couple of people. We continually have to plead for some money in our donation jar to cover our expenses so that we're not a burden to the library. We are supported by the library, but the library really doesn't have us in their budget. And so it occurred to me that if there are people in our group who are willing to make a commitment to I've suggested electronic funds transfer from your bank account to the National Heritage Foundation World War II Lecture Institute. If we could get, say, a half a dozen that would put in $25 a month, $300 tax deduction at the end of the year, we could do away with our pleading for money, and we could take our volunteers and our speakers out to dinner. We could handle the other expenses. Jack Sky has a lot of expenses making videotapes and so on. So give that your consideration. Well, what else should we talk about? We are about 5 minutes until we should be closing up shop. If anybody has something to say.
You weren't here this afternoon. We had some problems getting things going here, and I mentioned the fact that Henry Adams was a teenager and volunteers here. If you want to get anything done with electronic stuff today, you talk to teenagers. And last Wednesday, we were talking. He said, I don't know if we're going to have a PowerPoint presentation because the computer went down. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to die because my whole thing was dependent on the visuals. And he got it together. And I think we all, if you ever had a chance to see Henry, he volunteers here on Tuesday afternoons. He comes in at 3 o'clock from high school. Tell him thank you. Young people are smart, let me tell you. He straightened that stuff out and was well beyond my capability. And I just wanted him to know that I